So just to clarify, my name is Tony from Black History Walks. We organise walks, talks and films on Black history every single month of the year for the last 18 years, right? We do it all the time. Today we're looking at this. I fought the law and I won with Judge Peter Herbert, who actually did win his case for racism against the government, which is not a typical easy feat, right? Let's look at some of these laws. Have a look at the laws in front of you and see what you notice, if anything, about these laws. Well, first of all, I can tell you, up until 65, there are no laws at all against racism. They don't exist. The first one ever is in 65, and this is the 60th anniversary of that law being passed. So until 65, black people did not have any protection against racist behavior at all. Now for each law that comes in here, 65, 68, 76,000, somebody, some set of people had to lobby, protest, campaign to get the law through. It wasn't an automatic thing. Someone had to kind of, really work hard and network to get these laws through. And it makes you think, if there's no laws against race until 65, what was happening to black people, Asian people, before 65? And also, think about this. When they got that law through in 65, how many black MPs were there in Parliament? None. None. At all. Zero. Zilch. So that then makes me think, well, how did they even get that to happen? What sort of things were they doing? And what can we learn from them? If they did that, then what can we do now? So you got 65, 68, 76. You notice that there's three of them in this part of history. Because the first one wasn't strong enough, the second one still wasn't strong enough, and they had to keep on expanding them and amending them. So let's look at what was happening back in the 60s. How many of you have been to a place called Oxford Street or Regent Street? Everybody, right? When you went there, did you see any black people? Working in the shops, that is. One or two. Which street did you go to? Right? Because you go to Regent Street or Street, you see a whole bunch of black people. That was not always the case. People had to fight for that to happen. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
We're quite happy to employ coloured people, providing they weren't visible. In other words...
Rewind and come again.
We're quite happy to employ coloured people, providing they weren't visible. In other words, if they worked in the kitchens, that was all right. But employers felt that shoppers wouldn't like to see coloured hands handling food over the counter. They thought that ladies wouldn't be happy to buy their underwear from coloured girls.
To get black people in shops, we actually had to get the cooperation of one of the key persons in the Oxford and Regent Street Traders Association. And this person said to me, if you can find me, and I want you to listen carefully, 4 pretty black girls, pretty in quotation marks, I will employ them. And then my colleagues will follow.
Right, so long story short, the only reason we have black people in the Regent Street, Oxford area is because of Dame Jocelyn Barrett and a fight for equality back in the 60s. Because at one time, as you just heard, you couldn't get a job there in a customer-facing role. Wow. In the kitchen, yeah. In the warehouse, no problem. But facing people, touching their clothes, no. Couldn't happen. Until she came along, got that law through, because she's the person who collected the evidence and lobbied people and got the law through in the first place, and then she went to Regent Street to have what they call a test case, to make sure the law was biting. So when she went to meet the head of Marks and Spencer's and was discussing that he should have some black people working in the place, right, working in the environment, she was being nice to him, but he knew and she knew that behind her they had this law, 68 law, they say if you don't do what I'm saying, we're going to sue you. That's what's taking place there. So sometimes, even if you have a law in place, the institution might choose to ignore the law, just like the BFI is doing right now. But I'll get to that later on, right? So, one more thing. When you heard her talk about, if you can find me 4 pretty in quotation marks, what do you think she was referring to? That was in England in the late 60s, late 70s. That's part of the story when it comes to these race relations. Actually, people had to fight with them, and use their experience to kind of get some sort of justice. Let me just jump for a little bit now. Let's go to card, because I'm not sure if you're aware about this situation, that we had a group here, headed up by Dame Justin Barr, called the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination, which she set up around the same time she met some guy called Dr. Martin Luther King. So you have an international cooperation when it comes to fighting racism, in that he's over here, and he understands that the racism here works a bit different than the racism in America, but they find a way to actually work together to help her get this law through, and then use these test cases to make sure the law is sticking. So that's part of the story. But let's move on, because you saw that kind of in-your-face, obvious racism back in the late 60s, 70s. Does that sort of thing happen in 2023, 24, 25, or is it all done? How many of you have been to the Ritz Hotel to spend the night down there? All y'all? No? Somebody? You might go there for afternoon tea. But let's talk about, oh, okay, fine, you went to afternoon tea, fine, that's good. Let's look at the Ritz now. What happened to the Ritz recently? This is from the BBC 2020, what does it say? The Ritz London applicant told Afro hairstyle was banned at the Ritz. Let's read it out together. A job applicant said he received a disingenuous and lackluster apology from the Ritz after he was told that Afro hair was banned among staff of the exclusive London hotel. Jarrell Jules had reached the final interview stage with the hotel when he was sent its employee grooming policy. The 30-year-old said he was later told that a black hairstylist from the Ritz had approved the policy phrasing. Mr. Jules said the document introduced racism. The Ritz says it does not condone discrimination of any form. Mr. Jules from Hammersmith from West London applied for a dining reservations supervisor job 2 weeks ago and was due to attend the final interview when he was sent the policy document. It stated that staff could not have unusual hairstyles such as spiky or Afro style. Mr. Jules, who works in corporate housing, said it was the first time he'd been told he could not have Afro hair for a job, and he declined the final interview. He said the personal grooming policy, dated 2021, was an example of corporate ignorance. So, according to the Ritz, they had a policy in 2021 of not allowing you to work in their hotel if you had an Afro. So from hair and grooming and shopping, let's go to life on the streets in the 80s. Now, in this room, was there anybody alive in 1980? Because that should mean you might remember them days, right? So let's look at life in London in the 80s and early 90s. Let's see what's happening here when it comes to policing now.
As mass unemployment hit the black community hardest, 1 in every 2 black youths was left out of work. We had a feeling that this weren't wanted in this country, weren't wanted, that we were despised. In January 1981, bitterness intensified when 13 black youngsters were burnt to death at a party in New Cross in southeast London. 3 months later, the failure to charge anyone for what the black community was convinced was a racist attack seemed a betrayal by the police.
We felt the police just didn't care. There was tensions already between us growing at the time, and that just pushed us further apart more than ever.
You know, when I came to this country, I was told, if you get lost, or if you have any problem, just go to a policeman. You know, you would not ask anybody directions. You go to a policeman because you see them as nice people.
But by 1981, the relationship between police and the young black men growing up in areas like Brixton had degenerated to a point of no return.
I'm in the underground, and I'm in Oxford Circus, changing tubes to come to Brixton. And that's when I first noticed these couple of men. They grabbed me. Excuse me, I'm arresting you for suspicion of pickpocketing from persons unknown. And I'm thinking, me no pickpocket, me a Rasta.
Almost every young black man in Brixton had a story to tell about police harassment or brutality.
I remember getting on a bus one time from Brixton going to Clapham, and they came on the bus and said I was making a press, took me off the bus, couldn't find nothing on me, they just gave me a good kicking, and sent me away. That, you know, what could you do with like 5, 6 police and just you as a little black kid? They didn't arrest no one, they just beat us up and left us there.
I didn't join the police as a racist, but whilst I was in the police, I became one. We just went out and made a beeline for whosoever we wanted to arrest. So you'd say you'd seen them try 2 or 3 car door handles, you'd seen them sizing someone up at a bus stop, and you'd see them put their hands towards a lady's handbag. People had no chance of proving their innocence. Evidence was planted, that was a common practice, and assaulting people was almost a daily occurrence.
They used to raid dances. I was in one particular dance where they battered down the door, beat up women, beat up men. There was countless police vans outside and on park that night. And I was one of those, in one of the police vans taken back to Brixton police station, my face pressed down to the floor. There was a boot upon my neck, upon my back, and then we were dragged out to the police cells. Sitting in that cell and hearing the screams of the older guys along the cell corridor, it was just frightening, frightening. So that's when I realised that these stories weren't extravagances. It was actually happening.
So that's the London 1980s. It was called the sus law. The sus law, short for suspicion law. That meant an officer could stop you and search you and also arrest you on suspicion in his mind that you might do a crime in the future. That happened for real. It wasn't a joke, it was happening right here. And as you heard the guy say, the officer said, he would often plant evidence on people too. So they'd stop for no reason and then plant evidence on you. Then take you to the police station, or actually they sometimes do it in the street, they just beat you up in the street. But in the police station, they might give you a swirly. They might give you a swirly. Now, who can tell me in this room what a swirly is, or was? Is. No, no one knows? All right, a swirly is when the police officer holds your head, he holds your arms behind your back, pushes your head in the toilet, and then flushes the toilet on your head after they've used it. I mean, number 2 used it, not number 1, number 2 used it. This took place across the nation in the 80s. Brixton, Carter Street, Stoke Newington, Notting Hill. This was typical known. You just ask the guys in the 60s, 70s. In fact, the judge can tell you, because he was around that time, and a man called Rudy Narayan, a black lawyer who helped to set Black Lawyers Associations, was the person who kind of led the charge legally against the sus law that was applied to black people. This leads then, well, if I talk about this, I should mention the Scrapsons campaign as well, but this leads to the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So it takes a whole bunch of lobbying, protesting, campaigning, legal cases, and people like Rudy Narayan and people like Judge Peter Herbert pushing the boundaries to get this PACE through, and that comes in 84. It's called the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and that helps to end this misbehavior of the sus law. Helps to end it, not it doesn't end it. Totally. Alright, fine. From that point on now, let me ask you, in what year did we get some black MPs? What year did we get some black MPs? When was Dan Abbott elected, please?
87?
54?
87?
84?
87?
87? There you go.
Ah.
That's when we first had some black representation in Parliament. So imagine now, how did those guys get all these laws through with no black MPs at all? What were they doing? How did they do it? This is very interesting, I find. But even now, you have 4 MPs out of how many? 650. Fine. That's 87. In 1993, that's when Stephen Lawrence is murdered. A racial attack in southeast London. Stephen Lawrence is killed by 5 white guys, and that leads to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which is a huge campaign all by itself. It lasts about, well, you could say it's still ongoing now, but it lasts at least 7 years, because this push for justice around Stephen's death, led by his mother and father and the community itself, That leads to the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry of 1999, which results in the 2000 Race Relations Amendment Act of 2000. Yeah? 2000, that's what it comes in. So there's a massive fight for equality around that death. If not for the Stephen Lawrence campaign, you might not have this amendment, which now includes the police. So you can see there's a struggle, the ongoing fight, 65, 68, 76, 2000, all these fights for justice, and they have some impact on that. You have a change in the law, but here's the thing. The law is there, but do the institutions always obey or follow the law? For example, any women in this room?
Yeah.
It's interactive, right? So, you have this act in 1970. This act says that men and women should get paid the same money for doing the same job. They should get paid the same money for doing the same job. Does that sound fair to you?
Yeah.
Right. That law does not exist until 1970. It doesn't exist at all until 1970. My question is this. My question to you is this. How long have we had women in this country? A couple of years, 5 years, 10 years. But not until 1970 do they have a law to make sure they get equal pay. So what took so long? And remember, women are not a minority. They're something like 51% of the population. So if it's that hard for them to get equal treatment, what happens then when you're 3%, 4%, 2% instead? What happens then? How much harder is it for you to get justice? But having said that, the law's been there since, what, 50 years or so? Is it the case now that women get paid the same as men doing the same job? No. There's at least a 20% pay gap across the board, even now. So from women, let's go to policing again. There's a man called Christopher Alder. He died in police custody back in 1998. So he died in the police custody up in Hull in 1998. How many of you are familiar with this man's name or his story?
No, I don't know his name.
A couple of you. All right, fine.
Okay.
Let's get into it, right? Because this is 90. This is actually after. This is 5 years after Stephen Lawrence has been killed. This is before you had the Race Relations Amendment Act of 2000. It's 1998. Let's look at this situation, and also you're going to see Judge Peter Herbert as a QC, a younger QC, a younger person, in this clip.
I had a lot of sleepless nights after seeing that. You're watching a man dying in front of you with your own eyes, and you want to help, and you can't believe that nobody's helping him. A couple of years later, I still remember every detail of it, and I think I always will. I was shocked, absolutely shocked, in what I'd seen and in the way that somebody could be treated, not as a human being. I mean, if it was anybody in the street, you'd still go up and check on them and make sure, you know, they were in the recovery position, call a doctor, you know, offer some assistance, but nothing was done to help a man who was unconscious.
Good evening. A former soldier who died in police custody was unlawfully killed. The jury members at the inquest heard that Mr. Alder had died with his hands cuffed behind his back. Today they returned a verdict of unlawful killing.
The jury came with a unanimous decision. What they stated was, due to the way that Christopher had been placed on the floor and basically left without any medical attention, that he was killed unlawfully. I really thought this was going to be the beginning of justice. I think I went through every single emotion that I could. I told her how brilliant we are, yeah? Because these ordinary people had stood up themselves to the system.
Despite the verdict, the Crown Prosecution Service was reluctant to charge the officers with manslaughter. Some of the medical experts they consulted were not certain Christopher would have lived if the officers had been quicker to help.
I'll pause there quickly just to explain that. What you see here is a recreation of the actual police video. So what you've seen here actually happened was on the police video. It's just being recreated for the TV company. But this literally was filmed that the young man was brought in there with his trousers back down by his knees and his bum exposed. And he died on the floor like that.
The family was forced into an unprecedented move. It was up to them to seek out their own experts to prove Christopher had died through gross negligence.
I mean, it was the most extraordinary position. It shouldn't be for somebody who is basically a defence solicitor on behalf of a family member who is meant to be being looked after by the Crown Prosecution Service to go charging off, getting further medical reports to bolster up CPS prosecution to help them to make a just and right decision. But that's what we had to do.
Finally, after many months of legal argument, the case came to be heard at Teesside Crown Court. For only the third time in the past 15 years, police officers were on trial after a death in custody. During the case, the jury listened to a number of expert witnesses, each offering different theories as to why Christopher had died. But despite their success in getting their case to court, the family was in for a shock. The prosecution had presented a number of conflicting medical opinions about the cause of death. So when they had finished presenting their case, the judge made a dramatic ruling. He ruled there was no case for the officers to answer.
In a prosecution case, you very usually have the expert which the Crowns prefer to put forward as their expert and leave the defence to call the experts which may contradict that. And then at the end of the day, it's up to the jury to decide, not the experts, about where the truth lies. Here we had a situation whereby there was almost a conference call of experts, and the line of least resistance was taken, it seems, and all the experts put before the jury. And the judge himself, the trial judge, said he'd never seen anything like it in a prosecution before. Certainly I have.
The collapse of the case was devastating for the family. More so as during the opening days of the trial, it looked as though one of the prosecution barristers had uncovered potentially significant evidence. Until then, no one had bothered to look through the other CCTV from the police station that night. When the video was examined, it appeared there was footage taken after Christopher's death, which contained puzzling noises.
It's clearly heard police officers making monkey and chimpanzee noises. This yet again is evidence that has never been disclosed from the beginning. And I believe it was found accidentally by a junior barrister at the trial, because he realised I wouldn't shut up about what was going on and the way that the trial was being run.
It is not clear who in the police station made what noises. A letter from the Crown Prosecution Service sets out their position on the chimpanzee monkey noises and the laughter after Christopher's death. Expert testimony says that such noises have been recorded. It could not, however, be attributed to specific individuals. It was not possible to establish from the tape or the transcripts who was laughing or making the noises. There was no evidence against any of the 5 officers that they had made the noises, and an attempt to use the material in court would be bound to fail. We have heard the tape. While the exact nature of the noises continues to be debated, there is the unmistakable sound of laughter in the custody suite later that morning, with Christopher still lying on the floor.
There are many parts of the evidence which had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of homicide police and indeed were buried within the CPS prosecution case. I understand there was some footage that was completely unexplained, unless it's normal for the homicide police to make monkey noises when they've just got somebody died in their custody of African Caribbean origin.
So that's, oh no, a little bit more.
With the collapse of the trial, none of the officers
got punished for it. So that's a massive case when it comes to black British civil rights, huge case. But when they asked the room about the man's name, not that many people knew his name. I'm sure you all know about George Floyd. This is 98 when this happened. It's a huge case. If you're interested, here's the book by his sister. So Janet Alder, the story is unbelievable. It's far worse than what you've seen here. But Janet Alder wrote a book, you can check it yourself. I'll give you some examples. In this situation, the police officers, after they arrested this young man and after he died, they dry cleaned all of their own clothes, their uniforms. They dry cleaned the uniforms and destroyed his clothes, and they washed out the van they transported him in. That's what the police officers did. And that's like 10% of the story. But this is 98, and you can see that Judge Peter Herbert was actually involved in that situation as part of his kind of community work, so to speak. Fight for equality. So we've gone from 65 up to 98, which is when that situation happens up in Yorkshire. Christopher Alder. Human Rights Act comes in 98 as well. And then if I jump forward, and I remember I'm kind of compressing stuff, we get to the year 2000 Race Relations Amendment Act, which covers all this stuff here. And then you have the 2010 Equality Act, which unites sex, race, gender under one Equality Act. And a spin-off of the 2010 Equality Act is this. Let me just give it to you here, so hopefully you can all read that. The public sector equality duty is a legal obligation in the Equality Act 2010 that requires public authorities to consider the impact of their work on people with protected characteristics such as age, disability, race, sex, and sexual orientation. The duty mandates that public bodies must have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, racial victimization, advance equality of opportunity between those who share protected characteristics and those who do not, foster good relations between people with and without protected characteristics. They're supposed to be proactive and check out what people need from the institution when they're going to make a big decision that affects that particular group. That's one way of looking at it. In fact, this helps to explain it as well. An equality impact assessment is a tool used by organizations, particularly public sector bodies, to systematically assess how a policy, strategy, or service might negatively or positively affect people with protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. The goal is to ensure that decisions and actions promote equality, advance equality of opportunity, and prevent discrimination against disadvantaged groups. While not always legally mandated, EIAs demonstrate compliance with the public sector equality duty and are considered good practice for promoting fairness and inclusion. So let me give you an example of that, right? Let me give you an example of how this would work. Are we aware of this statistic? We all know about this? All right, fine. This happens in America too. So here's a comparison. Let's say a big hospital near you employed a person. Let's say it's a white woman, right? And this white woman said she's going to address all these issues. And for 17 years, this white woman reduces these statistics, brings it down. She holds workshops, she holds seminars, she goes to the community, she brings community in because she actually recognizes that there's a lack of black people in the organization. She brings them in, workshops like this one, asks them questions, brings them in on a regular basis for 17 years, and she helps to reduce all these statistics here. Then, all of a sudden now, the majority white management says, we're going to get rid of that person with the 17 years experience of doing that and delete their job as well. So this person's got 7 years of reducing these bad statistics, successful track record, and all of a sudden now the management, the all-white management says, we're going to get rid of that person and their 7 years of experience and get rid of the job as well. Common sense would tell you, if that happens, how is it going to affect this situation here, do you think, maybe? And that's where we go back to this thing here. That's when they're supposed to do an equality impact assessment to check to see what would happen if you get rid of the person with all that experience and delete their job. It's two things. One is the experience of the person. She's the only person that has that experience in the environment, right? And the job, the 48 weeks of work required, is gone. So how then does all this, let me go back a bit, how does this work continue if you do that? So, if that was to happen, we would say, you should do a race equality impact assessment according to the law and also common sense. Because common sense would say that if you do that, there's going to be some sort of problem. But the law says it explicitly. Fine. Let me go now to the British Film Institute and something called African Odysseys, which I set up in 2007, 17 years ago.
5 years since the murder of George Floyd, the 25th of May 2020, it is worth reviewing the words of the British Film Institute compared to their actions. Where was the season of Black Lives Matter films at the BFI in May 2025? Where were the talks on black British people who died in police custody? African Odysseys organised such events many times before BFI cancelled the 17-year-old monthly programme. In June 2020, Ben Roberts, CEO of BFI, said, "People of colour are underrepresented across the organisation, including in senior positions. There are no POC in the executive team, and aspects of our recruitment and decision-making processes can push out rather than lift up non-white colleagues." So I'm inviting colleagues from across the film community to commit to change, to commit to being actively anti-racist, and to collaborate with us on making our industry a better place to work. 5 years later, the BFI executive team has only one black person present, making it 88% white. The Board of Governors has no African Caribbean people on it. This elite, overwhelmingly white body has chosen to ignore 16,841 voices from the global majority who signed the petition to keep African Odysseys at the BFI and to run an assessment to survey how its absence would affect the black community. The majority audience for African Odysseys films has always been black women. They have been behind the request that the BFI run a race equality impact assessment to see how the cuts, redundancies would affect the audience. Numerous high-profile black women with decades of experience fighting for racial equality, like Dr. Margaret Busby, Britain's first black female publisher, Dame Professor Elizabeth Anyonu, campaigner for the Mary Seacole statue, Yvonne Field OBE, founder of the Mbele Initiative, Mia Morris OBE, founder of Black History Month website, Bishop Rosemary Mallet, the first black female bishop of Croydon, and many more have expressed their support for African Odysseys. The BFI has studiously ignored them, and almost 17,000 people. The BFI has breached common sense, best practice guidelines, and the public sector equality duty of the Equality Act 2010. The BFI has also twice refused to meet Professor Gus John, who wrote them a 9-page open letter in October 2024. This behaviour contradicts the BFI's statement about being actively anti-racist. Professor John is an international expert on race, advises governments, helped write the 2000 equality laws, and trains institutions on how to run equality impact assessments. Why would the BFI refuse him an audience, especially considering that in October 2024, Roberts had to publicly apologise to Faisal Qureshi about race issues? The Guardian article quotes Faisal Qureshi. There is only so many times organisations can say they have learned from their mistakes, usually by inflicting trauma on ethnic minorities. That it took 5 years to get this far, only for them to go, "Trust us again," is not a reasonable reassurance. Maybe a more significant one is a change in their leadership. The petition to save 17 years of black film history at the BFI can be found at change.org. Please sign and share.
So that's a bit about the BFI and how they're breaching the Equalities Act, the law
5 years.
itself. This is just a brief summary of what was just said there. But basically, we've been, questions later on, right? We've been running these events for 7 years, packing out the 450-seat cinema on a regular basis, making them money, and by the way, we work for free. The guys behind the steering committee who actually kind of program the events, we work for free. For 17 years, so our labour's worth about £6 million, but they told us they had to cancel African Odysseys to promote diversity and cut costs, is what they said. So we're asking people to check out the petition here. You can go to change.org, you type in African Odysseys, you'll see it's got 17,300 people so far. Now, let's just forget the law, morality, equality laws, etc. Let's think about common sense. Let's say you all own the chicken shop, yeah? You all own the chicken shop. And one of your friends said to you, you should start selling chocolate-flavored chicken. That was his idea. And you said to him, that's so foolishness, get out my place, you silly man, right? Or woman, right? So you refuse the idea because you don't think it's practical. And that same person goes and gets 17,000 signatures saying, we want to eat chocolate-flavored chicken. What would you do? Ignore the person? Fire the person? Or send someone to Ghana to do some sort of deal with the chocolate from Ghana and make some chocolate-flavored chicken? Which would you do? Because the BFI has literally ignored 17,000 people, and you pay their taxes to make them have a business in the first place. I'll leave it there for now, but we'll come to it later on, because the point is, this is another institution that law is saying one thing, they're doing the exact opposite, even when you have all this support for this program, which is successful and actually still goes on, because even though the BFA cancelled it at their venue, we are still showing films around London. As for example, this one here, this is taking place this Saturday. It's called UK Civil Rights Kung Fu Movies and Anti-Racist Street Fighters. We're looking at the 1970s when there was an explosion in Kung Fu movies. A lot of people go and watch movies, but in our situation here, a lot of black guys got involved in martial arts, karate, taekwondo, kung fu, etc., but then used it on the street to fight the BNP in the National Front. Think about what you saw on Saturday, that big demonstration. That sort of thing would happen every weekend almost when it came to racists in Brick Lane, Lewisham, Hackney, etc. And people would be out there fighting them with their martial arts skills. The person giving this talk is a guy called Professor Les Henry. He's a professor in anthropology and sociology. He's also a 5th degree black belt in Hong Kong Karate. He'll be, and he's a black professor, which is rare by itself. He'll be giving a talk on Kung Fu, martial arts, black history, civil rights in this country next Saturday at Birkbeck, which is right next door. And we have a 2-for-1 deal. So we're going to be showing films on the talk with Professor Les Henry this Saturday. Come in, you can check out the website there. And now we're going to hear a bit about Judge Peter Herbert. In that, apart from being a judge and a lawyer and a QC and an international activist, right? He's doing this sort of thing. This man is organizing Pan African conferences in Africa, but also linked up to this country as well. And I should mention, by the way, that when it comes to this event, we have to thank Professor Craig from the RHUL for helping us out to have this event for free. But also, Judge Herbert is the kind of guy who can be giving like lectures at Park Lane. We pay £500 for a seat to eat some dinner. He's that kind of guy. Because look at his profile, look at his background. But he's down here for free. He didn't charge me no money. So that means I can do this event for free. So that's the kind of person I'm going to speak to shortly. Now, yeah, exactly. Now, hopefully, when you book to come here for free, you look at his profile. Because this profile is ridiculous. In fact, where's the movie about Judge Peter Herbert? You can look at any paragraph here. That's a movie, That's a movie. Because how many black judges do you know that will come and chat to you for free on a, Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon? I don't know that many, right? So he's going to come and speak to you. He's going to freestyle about his amazing career and also his fight with the institution, in fact, the government that he won. And then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So without further ado, Judge Herbert.
I was getting ready just to sit and listen out the rest of the evening. Because Tony is such an amazing presenter. Every time I hear him, I think, you should have been a lawyer, man. You wasted your time. So, big respect, because actually it's people like Tony that really make the connection and enable us, all ages, because we never stop learning, to know our history. And actually, back in the tradition, Tony would have been a storyteller. Back in the village, he would have been the person, the griot, to go to for the story. And he would have had all our histories here. And the histories would have been told to generation to generation to generation. And those are our history, our shared history. So whether you're from the Caribbean, St. Vincent, Grenada, from Nigeria, South Africa, Botswana, wherever we're from, and all the mixes in between, of Brazil, we had a storyteller. And therefore, that is a venerable position. They didn't have to call it a history professor, but we're there before history was written. We were that history, are that history. So I just wanted to make that connection. And before I delve into, and he's actually reminded me of so much that you're like, oh my gosh, I should have put some slides. But some of the images, next time I'll be more imaginative and put some slides. So I'll just have to try and make up with my vocalizing and storytelling. Right, so My story is your story. Firstly, it's not unusual, it's not exceptional, but it's all of your stories. It's only one example. So the furthest I can trace my African ancestry back is to Georgia in the southern states. And it came by oral tradition, because my father was from Sierra Leone, from Freetown, my mum was English. My English part of the family, it's quite easy to trace back to a mining community in County Durham. And going back to 1811, somebody made an entry on a diary, we sold a pig for sixpence. And another entry in the late 1800s was 67 miners died in a mining disaster in Hettenley Hole colliery. 2 people are going to emigrate to Australia. So a white working class history was sort of part of my upbringing. And mixed in it was my African history, which is very, very rich, but stops abruptly with slavery. We can't trace it further back, even the stories. But it is not unusual. And my family, the oral tradition is, escaped during or just after the American Civil War, fled to Canada. They didn't get a train, they didn't get a boat, they walked. And anybody who's been to the US from Georgia to Canada, you know that's a hell of a journey. And the family settled in Nova Scotia, where there's a historical and very, very impoverished African community. And there's a couple of books written, the Book of Negroes. Yeah, I can't remember the title of the author. Marvelous book, historical record of those freed slaves who then fought on different sides, but ended up in Canada. Some during the American War of Independence, but some later, because they went in waves. Nova Scotia was not a happy place. The Canadians, white Canadians, were ruthless. They'd already, around that time, just decimated, as I'm reminded, the original peoples of Canada. 90% of original people were wiped out in Canada by smallpox. Of the ones that were left, with repeating rifles, they slaughtered 15 million buffalo in 4 years. So their ability to build teepees, to house and clothe and feed themselves was decimated. And that's why, if you see those of you who go to the British Museum, you'll see a totem pole. And the totem pole is a sign that those communities, totems of their history and their culture, often were without a village, because the village had been decimated, they just disappeared. And they had a competition in the early 19th century to have totem poles. So if you go to Cambridge Museum of Archaeology, you see a totem pole. And I'm like, why? Why? And you go to the British Museum, totem pole. Go to the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, totem pole. Because that was like an iconic piece of somebody else's culture and history. Brought on a steamship, railway, etc., etc. So that gives you a little snapshot of what they were doing to original people, native people. But it's our story too. So my family left, my ancestors left Nova Scotia, came to London. We don't know the slave name, the enslaved name, but he married an English woman called Fitzherbert. At the time, the Germans had just invaded France again, so there was a lot of anti-German sentiment. So it wasn't too popular to be called Fitz, so they dropped the Fitz and we were left with Herbert. And then he decided to, as part of the waves of settlement, which the British did, of people of African descent, freed slaves, going to Freetown. And my sister in the audience, the fellow judge, is also from Sierra Leone. Patrice, respect. And so we came to be there as Creoles. And my sister, who's a consultant pediatrician up in Sunderland, she recently had her DNA analyzed, and she didn't find any trace of Mendi or Timini or Hausa or Fulani at all, because the Creoles were a little bit separate. But she found traces of every other piece of African you could get from enslavement. So, without telling the story of Sierra Leone, my father came back on a troop ship in 1945 eventually ended up from Florida Bay College, like many people of African descent, who could not get a job initially in medicine because priority was given to British soldiers and sailors and air people to qualify in medicine. But he eventually qualified as a dentist, doctor, and I came along at some point. And my journey of learning my history was only really discovered when I came to London and read a book which had just been published, was copied from a book by Scobie called The History of Black People in Britain. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's called Staying Power, but if you can still get it on Amazon, 1,000 pages long, and if you ever thought you were the first, no, you were not. No, you were not. You know, when our ancestors were running up and down Hadrian's Wall fighting the Scots, we were there. When they were at Agincourt, we were there. When they were sailing the Nelson's Victory, there's at least 25 sailors were from India, China, Pakistan, India, Jamaica, Nigeria, everywhere. All loading cannon. So there's not been a bit of British history where we were not there, which is something as a young person you think, oh, it just arrived. And even in Elizabethan times, there was, I think the figures say, 16,000 people of colour in London. And Elizabeth tried to ban them 2 or 3 times unsuccessfully. So the legislation, I cannot, in a sense, start by mentioning legislation unless I mention apartheid. I cannot possibly deal with what we've got in the UK without dealing with colonialism, because it was a natural progression. You cannot have racism and colonialism without racial superiority. You cannot have it without white supremacy. You cannot have it without having an ideology which you take from the colonies and bring to the UK. And many of the judges, some of them that were in the judiciary, had done their training in Nigeria, in the Commonwealth, so-called, in the Empire. So they brought all their baggage of racism and discrimination with them. They didn't leave it. It was brought intact. So the classification, IC 2, 3, 4, that was what was used in the Caribbean, all over the colonies. And it was about money and power and control. So stepping back from the legislation is how do we as Europeans, European nation states, empower ourselves? We take all your stuff. We give you our laws, we give you our religion, and if you take a trip to the British Museum, you know the Africa section's downstairs in the basement, you know, surprise, surprise. Have a look, because it is a little snapshot on what they have. And if you go across, deviate slightly, to Germany, you see exactly the same thing. The Humboldt Institute represents the German government. In Berlin, have a look in Berlin at what's on store of all of our stuff in Germany. Taken from Ghana, because yes, they had a fort in Ghana. Taken from Tanzania, Tanganyika. Taken from Cameroon. Taken from Namibia. So they actually sent, it was that bad, the theft, was they took train loads of artifacts out before 1914. They had to build museums in Germany just to house it. It was on an industrial scale to the extent that now, we was in Berlin recently, they have 490,000 artifacts of everybody else's from all over the world. 490,000. I mean, they display, luckily, maybe about 10,000 if you're fortunate. The same in Cambridge, all the museums all over the UK, whether it's religious or not. Human remains on sale. They displayed them until a few years ago as well. So the legislation has to sit in context of racism, ideology, financial control, domination, and subjugation, which was vicious. I mean, if they didn't hang people here, they certainly did it in the Caribbean during slavery. In fact, you know, we only hear about one Holocaust, like that's the only thing. And I was at a meeting online, somebody with the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and they had a moment of inclusion. They started going on about the Holocaust. I'm like, uh-huh. And this is a moment of inclusion about equality, diversity. So I looked at this woman, does she look like a white woman? I'm like, okay. How? Your moment of inclusion is about your grandfather who died in Auschwitz. And I was like, cool, okay, fine. That's your inclusion. But where did you say anything about other people's Holocaust? Where did you say anything about the genocide that's going on in Gaza and Palestine now? Or the genocide that is happening in Darfur, in Congo? Where do you mention it? Not a word. So I wrote in the chat. They were lucky. I nearly cussed them. I nearly cussed them. But you know, I told them about themselves. This is not the sole Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, you know, in terms of dignity and respect for humanity, please do not put yours as like the only thing that ever happened. No, it isn't. When you're there were people, Roma people killed. There were left-wingers killed. There were gay people, disabled people. Everybody was in that. But your inhumanity is you only see your own. So for me, I said to the person, and she's the head of equality and diversity? What? So I offered to meet her. She refused to meet. I said, I'm ready for you. I'm ready for you. I'm ready. Because my grandmother on my English side, who had a clubfoot, had a disability, she went out with her husband to defend German homes during the 1914 to 18. So don't tell me about anti-Semitism. My family were practicing it long before you knew what it was. Anyway, I digress. So the politics of where we sit now is a pure continuum from where it was before. And therefore, do not be surprised about Christopher Alder or George Floyd. The only difference is Rodney King. Somebody filmed it. Charles Wotton in Liverpool, chased and murdered by racists. The countless people who you never heard of, who lost their lives in slavery and colonialism and oppression. We have the names, Paul Bogle, etc. We have the names of those who rebelled against the Germans, the British, and slaughtered in their thousands. But they had not, the narrator was the narration of the hunter, not the hunted. And the hunter's story is one where, I shoot you dead. Once. And you know, your trophy appears. But in reality, where things are reversed, and I'm called to account for my wickedness, I will not portray that. So, in a way, the many direct ways, the arrival of Commonwealth citizens was done to save the empire. So, where there were caricatures, and you see one at the British Museum, of where they tried to recruit people. It was a marvelous poster of a very strong African man with the names of all the colonies. And they did the same in the subcontinent, in India and Pakistan as well. Recruiting people to save the empire. It was dignified, respectful, and strong. So it wasn't like the caricature that you find on some labels of French chocolate these days, still there. Because they wanted to recruit young men to save empire. And the French did it. The Germans tried to do it. The British certainly did it. And so when people arrived, it was often, as Tony knows, his history is amazing on this, commended to you, is the introduction of people of colour to the armed forces was done on an industrial scale. 500,000 people of Indian descent fought in the First World War. 500,000. 150,000 from the Caribbean at least, from West Africa, East African Rifles. And in fact, one of the funny things, my neighbour, who's a Sikh origin, said, you probably heard of the Amritsar massacre. And, you know, that's something where General Dyer gave, you know, permission to shoot in 1923. People were peacefully demonstrating, you know, locked the doors and shot them. There was actually I didn't realize there was a Sikh who came to kill the commanding officer of Dyer in 1935. He was hung for his trouble, but he shot him in London. And so there was a great necessity for the British to control those unruly people, even during the First and Second World War. So, and they would get round the policy of not having black officers by making them nominally white officers. And there's some famous footballers who had amazingly brave careers fighting for the British Empire as black officers. So the context during war, there was welcoming, a sort of caution welcome, because we needed you. But as soon as the First World War ended, then we want to send you home. So people of African and Asian descent, Chinese, everybody. There's the door. So with South Shields or Cardiff or Tilbury or Glasgow, all the people were sent home in significant numbers. And the first race riots were in 1919, not in 1981, 1919. Shots were fired, Worsingeli in Cardiff, in Tiger Bay, by Somalis defending their home, in South Shields. And so there was a whole hostility. The N-word was used like it was going out of fashion by senior police officers in 1919. And people were killed. Charles Wotton and many, many others driven from their homes. And so between the First and Second World War, there was an uneasy truce because the British Empire had to hold it down. And the fear was we can't have soldiers of African and Asian descent shooting white people because we understand, yeah, you're vulnerable to bullets as well. We can't have that because where's our superiority gone? And the same for the Germans. They feared the fact that we fear losing, but we fear putting you in uniform as well. So when I think it was a whole 2 or 3 Indian regiments had stopped the Germans in the Battle of the Marne, they were sent to Brighton to convalesce in a hospital of 3,000 people. And then the Warren Office said, whoa, the Defence Ministry said, we got to get rid of them. So they sent them to East Africa to fight. Because you can't have these good-looking Asian men meeting with local white women in Brighton. Oh my God, too scary. So they were shipped after they had defended the line. And so when it suited the empire, you were there. When it didn't suit, you were gone. And so in the Second World War, the same. And the racialization of the American armed forces was brought with them. So there's I think there's a book and a film being made out of it. There was the In Defense of White Women history which comes, and it followed black African American servicemen to the West Country. And there was, I think, 12 of them hung for allegedly raping white women in the Second World War with Churchill's authorization. Bengal famine, etc. So some of those who are most venerated by in the Second World War, Churchill and many, many others, were some of the most deeply racist individuals the country has seen. And some of his quotes resemble that fool who was killed recently in the US. It's the same playbook. It's exactly the same playbook. So whether it was the responsibility for letting people die deliberately in the Bengal famine, or whether it's referring to people of colour as really being completely inferior and not fit to rule themselves, that was Churchill. And so the legislation that comes after the Second World War is one of control. We need you because we're broke. By the way, Britain is seriously, seriously broke. You just sound familiar. Anyway, they were really broke. So they were still rationing in Britain until 1957. It's rationing here. So they desperately needed, Powell and others needed people to mine. So people from the Caribbean came to work in Nottinghamshire in the coal mines. Every single piece of life you can imagine, people came. And so the colour bars were part, and Tony's quite right, there was no legislation at all to prevent that discrimination. Sir Leary Constantine had a battle when he was turned away in 1944 from the Imperial Hotel, staying one of the most famous cricketers the Caribbean has ever produced. Couldn't get a room for the night, couldn't even get served. And I believe he won the case against the hotel because they breached his contract. But that, in a sense, is a reflection of what happened even after legislation. So I remember a little bit of personal history. Is going to do a case with another black barrister in Hull. You know, and you go to a place in Beverley, a place called Beverley, which is outside of Hull, nice sort of market town, and they look at you, oh, hello. They haven't seen you before. And, but we had to go to do a plea litigation unexpectedly, so we only brought a toothbrush, that was it. So, you know, it's one of those unexpectedly you have to stay overnight. So went looking for this place to stay, myself and this other barrister, in the suits, you know. And first place we went to, and yeah, we're just it's midweek, come on, Beverley, in February. Nobody stays there. There's nobody there. And the Americans have not arrived yet. So, and the book is open, and you can see over the book is empty. There's no bookings. All of a sudden, the book's, oh, yes, we're full. I was like, hey, really? But you know, it's been a long day. We're like, just, you know what? Just leave it. Let's take our money somewhere else. So we went to a pub, and unexpectedly, the pub was, yeah, come in, man, come in. We've got 2 rooms. And that is the space of racism in Britain. You can go for one door, and it's closed, and the next door is open. And it doesn't say anything about the wealth or the poverty or anything about who's buying. You simply don't know. But a few months later, the upshot of this end of the story was that hotel was featured because some black couple had phoned in advance, booked their room, paid, turned up, and then they said it was full. Big mistake. So they successfully sued themselves. Like, yeah, good. So it is, in a sense, the Race Relations Act was, 1965, was implemented because of this dichotomy, is that you have clearly a lot of people of colour arriving who are providing an essential function for the United Kingdom, but cannot get legal protection. And as always with these things, it's an amalgamation of progressive people like Tony Benn and many, many others on the left wing who actually fight for equality. And it's never been quite a simple thing of simply just us. It's always, generally speaking, a combination of race and class. And I'm not a person of black and white unite and fight. I'm not bothered about that slogan because, you know, when the toughs get going, they get going. Very few. But there are times when you need to make those alliances. And that is, in a sense, what did it, the trade union movement. But all of these movements and institutions, Britain had 2 faces. You know, one institution, we love you because you're working with us, my sister, my brother. On the other hand, I don't know, like. You know, so you had virtually every trade union and every institution where there were 2 sides. And the judiciary is, in a sense, no exception. They just happen to be in the majority on the other side. Because it was class. And we don't want you anyway, because you're not part of our elite, and you never were. Or if you were, it was almost by accident. You know, like Bell up in Hampstead. You know, we sort of let you in. But didn't mean to. And so the race relations legislation was a compromise, a symbolic gesture to Commonwealth that we are tolerant. Tolerant, what sort of nonsense is that? I tolerate mud on my shoe. I don't tolerate another human being. So whenever I hear people saying tolerant, I put that in the bin. You know, I respect you, I don't tolerate you, really. Tolerate is what I do with cold weather. Sometimes. So it was a compromise to introduce legislation, and it was strongly opposed by many Conservatives, some Labour MPs, but it wasn't effective. It didn't ban discrimination in public places. There were no real enforcement powers, and it was a sort of a toe in the water. So we'll limit that first generation immigration, but this is what we give you in compensation. Because there was always a link between numbers. 10 of you is okay, but 100 we really have a problem. That's sort of nonsense. Just the 10 we can beat you easily, than this is 100. If it's 100 we really have a problem because we can't beat all of you, not easily. So the numbers game is always that nonsense. Because in fact, I was visiting a friend in Orpington, and she said, "Boy, this place Orpington is a Farage stronghold. I ain't seen no black people down there, very few." You know, and it's this middle class thing about we don't have you, but we don't want you. And so this nonsense about it's because you're next door. No, they're not even next door. You're just on the TV screen. So they are often of the far right, and those who are the most opposed are in areas where we're not really there anyway, or in such small numbers as, you know, they can almost get over it. Rivers of Blood, all of these types of, it's very reminiscent of what we are now. Powell was a respectable part of British politics. You see all these fools turning up at his funeral? Blair, what a marvellous politics. Hey, really? So you wonder at their myopia and their lack of insight as to who was supposed to be venerated, rather like Trump's doing with this fool that was shot. Like you know, as Malcolm X said, if you send out a fox in a chicken coop, you will expect some violence. So Kennedy, this guy, you send out hate. You expect it. What do you expect? Nothing? And these are your own people. So just pausing on the current situation, the Tommy Robinson initiative is no surprise. It's as British as apple pie. Don't tell me this is not you. Don't tell me to shoot people in American politics is unusual. This is what you do. In fact, you've got a higher rate of doing that than we do in most parts of the rest of the world, where you supposedly tell us about our lack of human rights. But this is you. And then, you know, you see the rhetoric change. We hope it's a foreigner, the governor of Utah. We hope it's somebody from out of Utah. No, 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 this is your homegrown little racist. Homegrown Christian little racist. And while you're speaking about gun control, well, we what did he say? I think we afford a few deaths for as a price of fight of the First Amendment. Well, there you go. Second Amendment. There you go. So I don't cry any tears. And even when we express glee, as I think somebody did at Oxford University, they get suspended. How much glee does all these people venerate when anybody is killed? There's no penalty at all. So the Racial Relations Act 1976 was an attempt later on, because of basic grassroots activism by many in the Black Panther Party, the Asian youth movements, and there was internationally the UN Convention on Racial Discrimination, which pushed Parliament to implement a tighter legislation. The Conservative opposition was softer than in the 1960s, but it was sceptical on special treatment. You know, we're giving you an easy time. So they reverse it and say, actually, it's about white men being discriminated against, like we're. But there's all sorts of arguments that are manufactured to say this is okay. And then, you know, you've given some amazing stories about Christopher Alder, who, was one of a number of cases. And one of the things that Broadwater Farm, 1995, public order legislation, I remember going to a meeting around before Stephen was murdered with the judiciary, and the judiciary were coming out with phrases like "N in the woodpile," you know, work like a da-da-da-da, in their cases. And you have people of African descent being on trial, or as jurors or witnesses, and you expect me to believe that you've got a fair system of justice, the best in the world. I don't know who told them that. And so I went to see this guy who was in charge of the Judicial Studies Board, in charge of training for all judges in England and Wales, and he said, myself and Christiana Hyde, who's a retired African Caribbean judge, Shirley Honour, and we went to see him in the High Court, and he said, well, you know, we have issues with training for High Court judges. It's really not necessary. Police officers, yes. Probation officers, yes. Magistrate, of course, but not High Court judges. So we had a big fight. 3 years later, they brought in a section which isn't in here, but it's the section 91 of the section 95, sorry, of the 1991 Criminal Justice Act. It was a very small paragraph which had to be fought, where they published statistics on race and gender in the criminal justice system, supposedly every year. And you could see the disparities, which are still extant for people of colour. No discernible reason at all that justifies that disparity, with young black men in prison 5 or 6, 7 or 8 times more likely to be arrested, prosecuted with cases resulting in an acquittal, so on, where the evidence is rubbish. So fast forward, we had race training, and just to show, I suppose, a little anecdote, personal anecdote. There was a young black barrister from the northeast who had a Geordie accent, like when he arrived in London, and he asked a friend of his mum's, "Can you give me some advice on how to become a barrister?" And this was to a full-time judge at the time in the northeast of England, who sat in Newcastle. And the answer from my mum's best friend, a head teacher, was no. Haven't got time to see you. Can't see him. Can't give you any advice. Nothing. That person then became to be Lord Justice Taylor, the Chief Justice of the UK. And he was a person who, of Jewish origin, he persuaded, for whatever reasons he had, the judiciary to have full-time training for judges and magistrates starting in 1991 onwards. And I was at the meeting where I advertised, and I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, yeah, and of course you don't remember me because you said no." And I explained. So, you know, and the guy went red and fine. But it's good to hold that people to account and give them that reminder of who they are. And they will put Jewishness, they will put left wing, they'll put whatever else they put to try and tell you it's not me, but it is you. It's you. So that training carried on over 5 years. It was actually relatively effective because they took judges, full and part-time judges from around the country, stuck them in a hotel with ordinary people, no professors necessarily, or people with doctorates or anything, and nothing wrong with that, but they were ordinary people who experienced racism on the streets, in school, you know, in the community, and they would tell them, and we told them, you can't talk about cricket, or football, or music, or where you ate yesterday for lunch. Not interested, you talk about racism. And the ones that the next day, the breakfast was different. And for the ones that didn't get it, it was at the time of, Stephen Lawrence had just been murdered in '93. So we got Neville and Doreen to cut a video. I think they did a panorama program, and we showed it. But still, and there were some that were, you could see them visibly be slapped. Because they actually, for the first time, got an understanding of just how pervasive this is. And they knew, most of them had an understanding. You know, one in Guildford, I remember this one Crown Court judge says, "Well, actually, I have a half-brother who's black." And the rest of his colleagues were like, "What?" They say, "Yeah, his half-brother, the mum was, the father was an African-American soldier stationed in Surrey." So people have an understanding of, in a sense, what we face. It's just they don't want to acknowledge it. So you have the Public Order Act 1986, which strengthens the offences of inciting racial hatred. We were told for years, we don't need this. Yes, you do. Because it is particularly pernicious, so you need to have aggravated sentences or lengths of sentences for that. The Commission for Racial Equality obviously was in its day making significant impact because it was accessible. Race, you know, the report, obviously the main headquarters are in London, but there were racial equality councils up and down the country, and they were accessible. And that is one of the things that has been removed by Labour government, is remove that, and it was diluted into the Equality Council. I mean, who knows about that anymore? And they don't even know what they do themselves. But they were neutered, not by people like Trevor Phillips, sadly. You know, we have some of our own people who are gatekeepers, serious gatekeepers. And that is part of the issue we have. So, yes, you have the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, and slowly, as a result of pressure, the legislation changes. But the expansion of rights was partly because of Northern Ireland. You cannot have, say, for instance, religious hate being outlawed in Northern Ireland and not in the UK. That's a nonsense. So the Good Friday Agreement was interesting because it forced Northern Ireland to deal with its religious hatred. Forced it. And then the rest of the UK, well, you know, you can't have postcard legislation. So it became very difficult for them to defend that. And then the European Convention of Human Rights. And one of the things that is one of the damaging things about Brexit, they've thrown, a lot of our legislation was reinforced by European-wide legislation. So the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 6, 3, all of those sections, equal pay. And in fact, my judicial pension only comes because of Europe. Because they said, you know, part-time judges must be treated the same as full-time judges. If it'd been left to the UK, done. Finished. But, you know, about 10 years of litigation, eventually, we got that, thanks to Europe. And just in a sense, looking at the Legislation Equality Act 2010, the law is a mechanism to enforce justice. It is not justice. It is only one of the tools in the box that you have to ensure equal treatment. And there are some lawyers who look at it as the box. It is not the box. And I've done the last couple of minutes, because I know I want to have some time for some questions, is my case, our cases, Patrice, Noel, as the two fellow judges here who helped me fight my case, is a microcosm of what everybody faces. And my story, for those who don't know, very, very quickly, was about I used my position to speak out. And sometimes that gets you in trouble. Fine, but you know you're going to get in trouble anyway, so what the hell? On this particular occasion, I'd gone to, found parking difficult, I'd gone to Newham to speak for the first Muslim mayor in UK. And he was outspoken, unpopular, etc., and he'd faced police investigations, he'd faced inquiries by civil society, by the electoral commissioners, everybody. Couldn't find anything with the way he was campaigning in Newham. But eventually people complained, other parties complained, and a sole judge, single judge, ruled that he'd breached the electoral law and banned him for 5 years. So there was a huge meeting in Newham. Yes, Tower Hamlets, sorry, Tower Hamlets. And there was a huge, huge meeting, predominantly of the Bengali community. Trade unionists were there, I went along to give my support. And I said, yeah, the judicial system is racist. I mean, it's deeply racist. And, you know, decisions like this, I should have said decisions like these, but it probably a slip of the tongue because I was unscripted. But what the hell? You know, I didn't name the judge, didn't name the court, but it was, and I think just before I spoke, a trade unionist said, well, we don't have any judges of colour, you know, they all, da-da-da. I said, well, not quite, you know. So I identified myself as a judge, probably shouldn't have done, but what the hell, it was a joke, and it was correcting that misdirection. Anyway, somebody was watching it on YouTube, they posted it, you post what you like, no, I don't care. And they complained. So it was a judge who complained, and I got into a disciplinary. And it was trivial, because it was, you criticised a fellow judge. This is a chat talking Tower Hamlets. I mean, so we weren't even on the bench. But I was sitting in 3 different jurisdictions, and they worked out between themselves that eventually, that was in April. I'd just been to look at refugees dying in huge numbers in the Mediterranean with the Association of Muslim Lawyers, Black Lawyers, came back. And then in the November, it was proceeding quite gently and, you know, no big thing, I wasn't that worried. And then I went for a training in Victoria, and they said, well, I read my inbox, and it's like, we need to instruct that you have to suspend yourself from sitting, and if you don't suspend yourself from judicial sittings, we'll suspend you. I was mad. I mean, I was worried and mad. This is most of my income. Worried and mad. So I went to this training, and there's this fool who had written this email to me, taking the training. So I'm like, okay. And there's a High Court judge I won't name who was in my chambers at the time and who I got to act as a witness. And I took my phone out and I'm recording them, but they don't know. And I said, well, you do know there are three white judges sitting in immigration who was bullying and harassing a friend of mine, Patrice. And they haven't been suspended, and this has been going on for a year. Nothing happened to them, not even a hint of suspension. And we no idea about this. And they said the threat was, we'll report you. What the policy says, when I went to look at it over the weekend, it says you cannot, nobody has the power to suspend a judge in England and Wales unless there's a report sent to the Lord Chancellor and Lord Chief Justice and they agree. The reality was these people had never sent a report. They'd never sent it to the Lord Chancellor, Lord Chief, and they had no power. So it was a threat which was empty. Because the issue was so trivial, relatively, they couldn't do it. And they knew they couldn't do it. So I said, well, and I was ready to get Channel 4. I was ready. And next time I get the film, I was like, yes, I'm ready for Channel 4, Harrow Crown Court. And they said, okay, well, the agreement is this. We'll agree that you won't sit on Monday, but we'll meet, the judge who sent the email said, we'll meet in my chambers at the High Court on Monday evening at 5 o'clock. So they got Rabinder Singh, who was, you know, we always get one of the brothers or sisters to come and stiffen it up. But Rabinder's cool, because I know Rabinder, he may have changed a bit now, but he was okay at the time. And he's sitting there, and he's obviously had a word, said, no, this is not good. It's not going to look good. So they rode back, the suspension was lifted, they paid me for Monday, and I went back to Harrowcroat on Tuesday. And the trouble was, that suspension came when a Sri Lankan friend of mine passed away that weekend. So instead of grieving for, her name's Tana Malvargan, instead of grieving for my good friend, I had to spend this nonsense sending emails about this foolishness. But do not upset somebody when they're grieving a friend. That's the worst possible time. I probably would have done it anyway, but hey. So I sued them. Once, twice, 3 times. And I had support from Nawal, Patrice, who were going through their own battles at the time. We met with David Lammy, a bit useless. But that's no surprise. A leopard does not change its spot. And he professed all sorts of, support and everything. And a couple of years later, I said, I can have a character reference, David. Oh, well, I'm going to be conflicted, It's just difficult. So I got one from Diane Abbott. Respect to Diane. Big respect. And so you know who's on your side and who's not. And so that case trundled through the courts for 6 years. The disciplinary panel, I was represented by the late Courtney Griffiths KC. I'm not a KC, by the way. I've never been a KC. Not at all. So I never got to those heights. I just missed paying somebody. But anyway, I didn't. But he represented me, marvelous guy, brilliant lawyer, one of the most brilliant advocates that I've ever known, and represented me very well. And they found the panel, which included a High Court judge, because they're all mates. She said, well, we found, this is the written ruling that came out, I only mention it because it's quite interesting, she said, well, we find against you because you gave a speech, and what aggravated your speech against this fellow judge was the fact that you're a well-respected ethnic minority barrister. So I didn't even see this. My counsel saw it later and said, well, that's direct discrimination. So you're not just human rights lawyer, but you're so being black is even worse. And I know what she meant, because she basically meant there's a bunch of Bengalis and you're all the same. You're all brown people. So, you have that state, but she couldn't get a way of, this High Court judge couldn't find a way of saying it or hiding it. So that was our second case. Second case. The third case, then I sent a letter to the Guardian. I said, I can't swear. No, I can't swear. No, I won't. Rubbish. So this is rubbish. And the Guardian published, this is rubbish, and you're all a bunch of racists, including the Lord Chief Justice. And they said, well, that's the second complaint. So they started a second complaint. They hadn't even apologized for the first one, and they started the second one. So I said, I'll sue you again. So we sued the 3 High Court judges, Lord Chief Justice, Liz Truss, bless her soul. Because she was the Minister of Justice at the time. Bless you, Liz. And so it sued her. So the defendants were serious. I mean, it was impactful. So all the black staff at the tribunal looking at it, yeah, this is great. This is a really juicy one. 18 months later, I think 2018 October, I'm sitting in Kenya, which I enjoyed, and I get this letter saying, well, we have to apologize because this was an error made by a junior member of staff. And we apologize for the time it's taken, 18 months. So the disciplinary panel found against me that recommended I get an apology because they'd broken every rule. And so they, on the one hand, did. But this lovely, I'm trying to remember her name, anyway, she was another High Court judge, deputy president of the Court of Appeal Civil Division, recommended as the judge who was given my file for the second complaint, not accepting my punishment, refusing to accept it and suing somebody. She recommended my immediate dismissal. Not fit to be a judge. Quote unquote. I'm like, whoa, okay. So I'll sue you as well. So add to the list. And at that point, the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office, JCIO, got a bit worried. And so they called it a truce. They said, well, we better just stop. So they suspended their disciplinary procedure. But meantime, in 2017, I think back a year, there was a policewoman, I think called P, and she took on a case against the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, arguing that disciplinary panels internally, despite the fact they have legal chairs, had no immunity. And what the Ministry of Justice had argued, that all these judges who had messed up my case had judicial immunity as if they were sitting in court. No, 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 you don't. No, you don't. The Equality Act 2010 says I can sue all of you. So we went to the Supreme Court, and Lady Justice Hale was like, hi Peter, almost. Yeah, she did. And I was like, unfortunately, I should have asked to speak, because I was sitting there with Lee Jasper and Viva Moon and people who were at the back. And we P1, and we were, because we actually, the first time black organizations have ever intervened in a high court case, in any case in the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, ever, as black organizations. Black Police Association, black probation officers, although they weren't in existence at the time, and one or two others. But they basically gave us permission to intervene as a point of importance. So one of the things, last things I think, we are not sometimes strategic enough in using legislation to intervene in cases involving us. There should be no case of sanctions against the Israeli government, no case of asylum seekers being targeted, where it goes up on a point of law where the communities are not represented. What are we doing? It costs £800 to intervene in a case in the Supreme Court. If you're accepted, you get a right of audience. They say you can charge your cost, but they won't dare. But you get to be heard, and you use it as publicity. So I think all these progressive organizations, there still need to be, and the community is a lot more proactive in doing that. So in my closing, the threads are this. We should not be surprised at the racism we experience. We should never be surprised, because if you're fighting for your rights, you will feel a pushback. And part of this pushback about the people who are on the streets, these white people who pretend they're nice on the streets, are some of the most out of work, illiterate, ignorant sons of whatevers that you'll see. So nobody's pinching their jobs because they don't want to. Generally, they don't have it. But what the elite does is they use them as their foot soldier. And that's one of the reasons why, when you're looking at, they are the enemy, but they're not the enemy. Because they are doing the job of Farage and his people, Boris and his people, but actually, they have always held them in power. And if they weren't trading or messing us up, they would mess them as well. So they do that with impunity, but they are either too stupid or too ill-educated to really see who the enemy is. And that's why when the Black Panther Party got in the States, and that's why one of the emancipation goals was to make sure that poor white people in the South and people who were enslaved people got together. Because that is something the elite all over the world fears. And I suppose in closing, we don't ever say that our young people can't do things, because they can. I've seen Gen Z in Kenya, whether it's in Nepal or anywhere in the world, do exactly with some serious courage and strategy what we have not done. So passing the baton on to the next generation, I don't have a problem, because it's always been possible, it's always been taken up. We're doing our bit, we've done our bit, but I look with, despite the current problems worldwide, the pendulum will swing. And when the pendulum swings, then we will be there to take the benefit. It won't be easy, but was it ever easy? And so whether we're originally from India or Pakistan or Brazil, wherever our diversity comes from, the time the colonizers had our lands is a minuscule part of history. But when you know the continent, subcontinent, our civilizations were hundreds of thousands of years old. And so we can look to the future with confidence, numerically, in terms of our abilities and our survival, because we're here, because you were there. So let me stop there, because you know I can talk all night.
Any questions for the judge? Just put your hand up and we'll each select you.
Yeah, could you just go back over what you said about the £800 to intervene?
Yeah, I think it might have gone up a bit now, but in the Supreme Court, if there's a criteria on the docket on the Supreme Court website, that if there's a case being heard by the UK Supreme Court, and you represent, you can't do it as an individual, it's very difficult to do as an individual, but if you have, you're raising a new point, or a novel point of fact or law that is relevant to the case in issue, you can, if you pay a fee of £800, intervene and be heard. So, the Black Equity Organisation, BEO, that's one of the things I've said to you must do this. You don't have to start a case, it's very cheap, £800, but you have to be heard. And so strategically that is what, Black Housing Associations, Indian Workers Association, there's a whole range of groups that could intervene. So don't just leave it to some white liberal organisation to do it. We can say ourselves. And actually you give them credibility when you're there. Because it means you have a coalition there.
So can this be done with something like joint enterprise?
If the Supreme Court are looking at joint enterprise, and a case involving joint enterprise, yes, and there's a point of law, in fact. I mean, it has to be to get to the Supreme Court has to be a point of law in the first place. But yes, and technically it's possible to intervene, and you can file what's called an amicus brief. Amicus brief, that is the other way. But amicus, that's effectively what we submitted. And it works, it's well known in international law. So in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, Yugoslavia, we had amicus briefs. So freedom of speech was, you have amicus brief. Yeah. Sorry, yes, and then phoned a friend, relieved myself, came back, and the clerk was like, would you mind to come? No. And I stayed out for half an hour, and when I came back, I had a strategy. So before she could speak, I said, let me just stop you there. What you did lacks judgecraft. Let me tell you about racism and a lack of judgecraft. I said I was a vulnerable litigant in person, you ignored that, and you put me under a timeline. Now you've wasted a good lot more time, and I'll tell you the timetable for the rest of today. I said, we will break in half an hour, and we'll go for lunch, we'll come back at 2 o'clock, and you'll hear whatever submissions you can get in by 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock we're done. If you have a problem with that, well, I will take it up on appeal. And I will not be treated like some second-class litigant here in front of you when I'm dealing with racism. So yes, and she actually had to step back, because I told her, because I had more experience than she did as a judge. So I'm like, no. But sometimes what you have to do is face your fear, overcome it. Afterwards you're like, did I do that? Hey, that was very fun. I really enjoyed it, But the struggle has sometimes had to be about fear, but overcoming that fear. And yes, there are dark moments, there are hard moments, where even some of your best friends, Peter, don't do this, And there is a cost, my family, my son, and you wonder about the times when I should have been for them and I wasn't. And there is, of course, a cost. But actually in COVID, they did me a favor, because I took early retirement and bye-bye, it was okay. Because my colleagues a lot of them were unemployed as a part-time. But to answer your question, there is a cost. I think I'd have to be somebody a bit more independent and impartial to say what the cost was, but there is, yes.
Going to something a bit more here and now, talking about legal strategies and so on the specific case that Tony mentioned earlier with the BFI, have you any ideas? Perhaps you've already shared them with Tony, I don't know, but in terms of legal strategy that could be used to call the BFI to account for cancelling the African Odysseys program there, and if there is a legal strategy that you think might have some traction.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to war with the institution. You can pick it outside, you know, so everybody goes in. You inform them, but it requires some commitment. You can do a letter before action, threatening to sue, and sometimes letter before action and publicity is what you can do. And you can try and get to their mechanisms for their constitution and see what constitutional possibilities there are for challenging those decisions. Sometimes you have to take the view, is this really worth it? You know, you sometimes have to build your own house rather than go to somebody else and repaint it. So there's a number of different mechanisms, and this is an example of repainting your own house, because what Tony is doing in a sense is doing just that. So some of the stuff that should be is here, and it will be in different places. So there's many different variables, and as I said earlier, I'm happy to help write a letter or two. So yeah, there are things that can be done, but I think you've got to just be creative and think of different ways to, you know, put as what did they do with Mr. Trump? They did the image of him and Epstein on the wall. So there's all sorts of creative ways of making a point. But sometimes some more riskier than others, obviously.
It's a pattern of behavior with the BFI, and you know, just to hold them to account, really.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you'd have to. I'll have a chat with Tony at the sidebar about it, but there are many different ways of doing that. Yeah. At the back, sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Herbert. So yourself and Rudy were at the cutting edge of the campaigning side of the bar. How do you find the bar now in the 21st century?
Well, actually, I have to say Rudy was at the cutting edge. I arrived after Rudy was well up and running. I arrived in, he started in 1978, I think. I arrived in London in 1983. So the Society of Black Lawyers was founded in 1973 by himself and Sigfrid Cardry, the KC. And they did the running, actually. And I was just the beneficiary of all that running. And I can say that just one snapshot is sometimes you very often need people like Rudy, who was the best known African Caribbean person in the UK before.
Indo-Caribbean.
Yes, he was Guyanese.
Indo-Caribbean.
Yes, Indo-Caribbean. So his background was somebody that he led the charge before social media, before The Voice even, I think. And Arif Ali and people was his publicist, etc. But I take respect, and I benefited once, just once, give you one little example, and the bar now, come on to that, is there was a meeting where Tony Scrivener, who was the chairman of the bar, had a decision whether or not to pass the bar's equality policy. I think it was 1990, I think is about that time. It might have been earlier. And Rudy walked in, and the meeting was something like that, Gone with the Wind. All the white people are downstairs in the bar council, all the black people are upstairs, all we just didn't have is fans. You know? And they were, you know, the analogy is, because that's how it felt like. That's what it felt like. It was, I think Lincoln Crawford was downstairs, there was one. And Rudy came and sat down, and everybody expected Rudy to, from the floor, just to lambast them. And he was really nice. They said, "Oh, glad to see you're here." And I came and lambasted them, and they didn't expect that. So that was an example, and Tony Scrivener after lunch said, if you don't pass this equality legislation for the bar, I'm going to the Times at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to resign at 4 o'clock. So you all better pass it. And you sometimes need people to put people on the line like that. And as for now, it's subtle. It's still probably, we're in more places, but sometimes we are the gatekeepers as well. And that is the problem. You know, black faces in high places can just be high, but it doesn't mean to say they make any difference. And so I am currently representing a surgeon of Indian origin, and the people who are the gatekeepers are fellow Indian people. one of the best surgeons in the UK, facing nonsense. You know, and it is behind them, obviously some senior white clinical managers, but who's doing the dirty work directly is his own people. And it's nasty. So the bar, like most institutions, moves after George Floyd was killed, and then it stops. Corporates, all these corporates had George Floyd tributes, and then done. That's it. We've done that. That was yesterday. So the answer is all of these institutions have to be watched and have to be taken on, almost by each generation, and have to be held at account, as Tony was saying. And it is for each person to work out a way of surviving, but to doing that challenge, and then still maintain their professionalism, which is not easy.
Thank you.
Just somebody that hasn't asked? Yes. I see you. Yes, so go on.
So I volunteer for a housing union, and as we know in housing, disproportionately black people are treated quite badly and given poor housing. I find that when I'm supporting people in court, the cases go against them. And one thing that I found is that I can't find... Sorry, can you speak
up? I can't hear you above these people speaking behind.
Okay, can you stop speaking behind them? So one thing that I found is that I cannot find a decent law firm to represent people that are dealing with housing issues, particularly black people. I've had an experience with a Nigerian law firm that I had to take to the Law Society because they were so terrible. And it's a real, and I'm not criticising Nigerians, I'm saying that it was a Nigerian-led law firm that was so bad that I had to report them to the Law Society. And so my point is that there are no decent law firms that are representing people. When you approach local law firms, and I'm in East London, Hackney, what they say is, we're full to capacity, we can't take any more cases. Now, I'm not sure if that's because it's immigration, it's dealing with immigration, or if it's something else, but where can I find a decent law firm that will take on people for housing cases?
I mean, that's not an easy answer because I'm happily out of London most of the time, but it is sometimes you can go to a direct access barrister and obtain, I'm flying the flag for them, but sometimes that is an alternative because barristers are allowed after 3 years practice to do even the pleadings and represent people as well. So that's sometimes a cheaper option, and they have their careerists, so you know they have an eye on their own career, and you may get more of a solution from that. But there's a real problem because of the huge denial of legal aid as well. So there's a squeeze on legal services. So firms that used to help are not in a place to help. So there's no easy solution to that at all. And law centres closed, CABs reduced. So there's a whole range of services that under all governments have been shut down and marginalised. But direct access barristers, pro bono, the bar's got a pro bono unit. Some city firms like Clyde & Co has a pro bono unit. Those may offer some solution.
All right, 3 more questions from that side and that's it. So 3 more questions from that side, that's it.
The far, far side. Yeah. Yeah.
You've experienced so many changes in the UK in terms of law. Are there any cases that you can talk about that changed your perspective on law and justice?
That's a big one. I'm trying to think. I think the ones that we've talked about are some of the major ones. Ones I read about, like everybody else, I think, are ones where the government has made a decision and there's a pushback. So, you know, when a flight is about to take off to France and somebody challenges it, those are fascinating cases in terms of immigration. One of the ones that I did with as an immigration judge, cases of modern slavery, have been really impactful. So a group of young people from Nigeria, but could have been anywhere on the continent, that were really brought here under supposedly promises to their parents and relatives of going into education, and were just used. And so the fact that was overturned, but the Home Office was trying to deport them anyway, I saw the case on Channel 4 and it came in front of me the next day, and I thought, okay. So all of them stayed, and they appealed me, and the appeal was unsuccessful. So those type of cases where you get the opportunity to make a difference are quite significant. But there's so many over the years. The ones that we sometimes don't even hear about are people fighting lonely battles. Yeah. So it's the sister there, and then and then in the red as well. Yes.
I just wanted to know, as kind of lay people to the judiciary, what is it that we can do, or is there anything that we can do to influence and help reform criminal justice?
I mean, it's always about getting out on the street and getting to know your MP, your local MP, lobbying, and you have to think outside of the box. Sometimes even just going to support somebody who's litigating in court. So, you know, if you all turn up in your case and you're in Hackney, what? You know, it's like it's an effect. So you change the dynamic, and the judge in court or judges become the minority. And they don't, it's not a demonstration, you know, but I had my people there kissing their teeth and whatever, and those people were putting some pressure. You know? So there are things you can do. When you hear about a case, go and watch. And it does make a difference. The sister in the red. Colleagues. Just one. Because I'm top.
I wanted to ask you about reparations. That's got to do with international law. And the running bill is just do something on payment. How would you proceed to try and get reparations?
Okay. I mean, I have to be, just answer this. I have to be quite honest. For a long time, I thought reparations is those people who are on the extreme. They meet once a year, have a celebration, beat a few down, and go home. And for me, it was almost a distraction. But actually, it's become mainstream. And the reason it's become mainstream is because of ordinary people saying this is something we demand. And therefore, as an activist, you have to listen to where the mood is going, and also what is possible, because it's okay for reparations to be paid to the Japanese for the Second World War internment. It's okay for reparations to be paid for the Holocaust by Germany. It's even been stretched to reparations, although they don't call it that, to the Herero and Gama people in Namibia for what the Germans did to exterminate and commit the genocide in Namibia, Southwest Africa. And therefore, ours is not far behind. And the effects are huge. Now, it may not be, I'm not a fan of giving out money, because if you give out money, generally, it doesn't trickle down, it trickles up. And therefore, I'm not a fan of that, but restitution reparations can come in the form of educational grants. So it can come in the form of building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure which goes to progressing everybody. It can go to loans for entrepreneurs. It can go to empowering young people. It can go to a diverse way, provided it's just not given from ex-government to ex-government. Because guarantee that will go missing. And it won't be impactful. And restitution, we're looking at, finish with this, restitution of African artifacts. So we're heavily involved in that at the moment. There's been a paper produced about the legal ramifications of how to do it across, oh, thank you. I was just hiding that. And so we're looking at that. And one example is we want to find a piece of low-hanging fruit. If you go to the Humboldt Institute in Berlin, you will see a throne of a Cameroonian king, which was a throne passed down through generation and generation. And when the German colonizers arrived, Kaiser Wilhelm II, or first, he had a colonial officer who wanted this throne. It's a magnificent throne. It's about so high, because the king was a tall man. Beautiful throne. It's spiritual, it's religious, it's historic, all of the things in that throne. And the colonial officer said to the king at the time in 1913, he said, "We want your throne." And the king says, well, fine, that's okay. I'll make a replica and I'll give it to you in 6 months. The German said, no, I don't think you understand. We want it now. And we don't want a replica, we want this throne. And if you don't give us that throne, you're dead. and your people are removed from the land. The throne is still sitting in Berlin, in the Humboldt Institute, and the story reads in English, this was given under some colonial pressure. So that's one of the things we're looking to have a go at suing the German government, because they had the audacity, when the king's descendant came to look at the throne, they said, well, you can just sit there, take a nice picture, now go home. And that's what they did. So restitution can come, reparations can come in many forms, but it's almost as if you took the whole of Windsor Castle and stuck it in a crown. Everything. Would they stand for that? No. Thank you.
All right. He's got one more thing to say about his upcoming Pan African conference in Tanzania and also Vauxhall. But I've got to shout out and big up Kwaku there with the documentation, because Kwaku's actually tracked down and filmed a whole bunch of black British civil rights activists on film in book form. So make sure you check out his stuff later on. But for now, let's hear a bit from you about your Pan African events.
Yeah.
And then we'll do it.
Okay. Sorry to keep you, because I know it's a bit warm here. I'm lucky to live in Nairobi. I went there since 2017, and marvelous country, marvelous people. And we, at the time I went, 2017, we just were involved with the Grenfell fire. So as activists, we called ourselves Bandung. We had a WhatsApp group called Bandung. And Bandung, for those of you who know it, is the first non-aligned movement conference in Indonesia, Bandung in Indonesia. So we pinched the name, and because it's difficult sometimes anywhere as being an activist, what name do you call yourself? You can either choose an African language, or you can make a name up. But if you choose a West African one, the people in South Africa are not necessarily happy, and vice versa. So we said, well, let's choose something symbolic. So Kenny said, what is that? Bandung, what? So we explained. But actually there's a Kenyan link. And so we have annual conferences, we have initiatives about restitution, we do campaigns to support civil society in East Africa, in Nigeria. So I've got a chair who's based in Lagos. I've got another vice co-chair who's Asian Kenyan, odontologist, brilliant woman. And scholars, Professor Pielo Lumumba, Faith Odhiambo, who's the current president of the Kenyan Law Society, Rungu Houghton, who spoke at SOAS around the corner, people who have been involved with civil rights, human rights in East Africa, marvelous people I've had the honor to meet. And so our conference is in November, it's a bit close, but if you want to come to the continent, if you've never been before, you want to go back, it's from the 19th to the 22nd of November in Arusha, in Tanzania. Get out the map, it's near Ngorongoro Crater, it's the World Heritage Site, and for 4 days. So we're bringing some people from the diaspora, from the UK, from Birmingham, from London, maybe from Liverpool, and we'll have around 200 or 300 people there over 4 days. And we do it every year, so even if you don't make it this year, you can make it the next year, and it's a hybrid event, so you can always log on. But we'd be delighted to see some of you either in person or live, online. So yes, that's what I do, and humbly enjoy myself when I'm not playing golf, that is.
We have to thank Professor Craig Prescott, that guy with the glasses, the bald head across there, big him up.